Well, hello again, everybody. You've made it through paper number 2. I hope it wasn't too hard. I'm recording this a little bit early due to just the way the world is, the way the news is, the ideas swirling around. It felt like the perfect time to make this video, even though it's a couple weeks early, talking about Martin Luther King Jr., his legacy, this letter that's kind of his defining moment in civil rights. Other than his I Have a Dream speech, this is the big one. Most people have never read this essay and don't really understand, were never really taught what Martin Luther King Jr. believed, what he was working for, how he wrote, who he was writing to, how he was making change happen. These details kind of get lost in our history classes usually, and we just end up learning that, and I think falsely learning that he solved racism when he didn't. He was responsible for helping make great strides towards fixing a lot of very bad laws, but he by no means accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish, which is something I think you'll see as you read this essay. I'm going to dedicate the video this week to Martin Luther King Jr. and to this essay. You're going to be doing a journal, your normal Thursday journal, on this essay. It's going to be our introduction and our only essay on how to write an argumentative paper. I'll be talking about your upcoming argumentative paper in next week's video, about what I expect, resources you have, all those good things. So if you're interested in that information, watch next week's video. I'll get that posted soon as well. This video is going to focus on MLK, what I'm asking you to do as you read Letter from Birmingham Jail. And then also, just it's time for me to speak to you all about the things that I believe about this movement that's happening right now, and how this letter from Martin Luther King Jr. Feeds into the history of our nation and how we got to where we are, and maybe some thoughtful responses on what we can do in the face of all of these protests and all of the demands being made. A couple weeks from now, when you watch this, I don't know where the world's going to be, and maybe as you're responding to this video, you can bring everything up to date as you include the latest information. But I'm recording this right now, a couple weeks before you're going to be watching this, shortly after Minnesota has defunded their police. So we're going to talk about that and talk about MLK's legacy and how it ties into that. You'll notice that right when you see the opening of this essay, that it's not structured like the argumentative essays that you grew up probably practicing in middle school and high school, right? Where you write a thesis, and then you get your points, and you find a little bit of research and throw it in there, and then you conclude, right? Boring. You know, my thing already is that we explore in our writing, that we respond to real things in the moment that matter, and tie in ideas that are timeless, that bring these texts to life forever, things that deeply can affect how we live. As you all were reading Civil Disobedience, it was great to see almost all of you commenting on how the ideas in that essay were just so immediate still. Things that were changing your lives as you were reading and discussing, and it's awesome. That's what good writing does. So we're going to shy away from cruddy writing. I'm going to ask you to write differently for your essay. I'll talk about that, like I said, in next week's video. But let's get into a few notes on Letter from Birmingham Jail. And then I want to speak about some of my thoughts on these issues as they relate today. And then in the forum for this video, I'll ask you to respond. Up front, I don't expect you to agree with me. I don't grade that way. I hope you know by now that I care deeply about critical thinking, about listening to others and processing what they have to say, changing for the better. Those are big open concepts, but they're ones that we can explore honestly together here. So just know that if you disagree with your peers, if you disagree with me, do so thoughtfully, respectfully, explain yourself, cite your sources. I'm completely open to being wrong, but we have to be honest about our thoughts and think deeply and receive pushback in order to get to the root of problems and questions we have in order to find solutions. So I hope that you can engage with that with me and have a really good time doing it, and hopefully a mind-changing and altering time as well. But let's get into this essay. Letter from Birmingham Jail is written when Martin Luther King Jr. is in jail for protesting, which sounds very relevant to today. You are going to be asked in the only one journal on this essay, but it's going to be quite an in-depth journal. I'm going to ask a lot of you. You're going to be asked to look into the background, the historical context, how did MLK get there, who is he, what degrees does he have, what does he believe, who's his audience. Like I was saying just a second ago, argumentative papers that matter don't follow a formula. You'll notice that this paper doesn't follow a formula. He moves between abstract ideas, I, thou, you'll see at some point, and then he moves to concrete stories about his own life, about people around him that reinforce those abstract ideas, so that you learned at the start of the semester is still carrying through here. Everyone uses it who writes well. You'll notice that summary is extremely important because Martin Luther King Jr. is paraphrasing and quoting people constantly, whether it's in order to have them support his ideas, or if he's summarizing the people he's disagreeing with so that they can say, yes, this is what we have said, this is what we believe. Then once they know he understands them, he can thoughtfully respond. Think about in life if you've ever been in an argument. Of course you have. In the arguments you've been in, when someone doesn't understand you and lashes out without addressing the things that you said, everything falls apart. There's going to be no meeting in the middle, no understanding, no learning. It's just a fight. That's it, just a fight. But when the other person reiterates what you've said to them, understands it, asks if they understand it, and then you can clarify, and then they push back, knowing what you believe, but then very thoughtfully, you both are open to learning at that point. It's disarming. Coming into an argument, you need to be open to that kind of learning, and MLK is. You're going to be asked to research who he's responding to. That's extremely important to understanding this paper and understanding the civil rights movement. And you're going to see that he structures his essay around them. He says, you said this, here's my response. You said this, here's my response. You said this, here's my response. That's the structure of the essay. It's him saying, you said this and I disagree with you. Or you said this and I agree, but I'm going to take it further. And then he puts all those ideas next to each other in order to build to his main point, which is roughly, I'm just going to say it here, that his protests are thoughtful, worthwhile, and going to make actual change. So he structures his response to the people who disagree with him to hit that main point by the end of the essay. He even starts by saying, opening with the big abstract complaint, you say that these protests are untimely and that they're not going to be effective. This whole essay is about him explaining that in fact it is the right time and these are going to have an impact. And then he just goes through how they structure their complaint and he responds point by point until it gets to the end and has made a very convincing argument that he's right and that they're wrong. He still seems open to being pushed against, but he's still very thoughtful and confident that he's making the right decisions. This is a real effective mind-changing type of argument. Very few arguments out there that you'll find popularly are written this well, but they're out there. So I don't want to really go through this essay and break everything down. I'm asking you to look at who the audience is, what the context is, and I'm asking you to name individual writing moves that MLK makes in order to make an argument. They're very specific argumentative moves. He, for instance, redefines the word extreme. Taking a word used against you and redefining it is a key move in argumentative papers to turn the tide of it towards your way. He also uses very visceral emotional responses, stories to convince people of his points. And I'm asking you in this journal to name and explore and then explain some of the moves that he's making in order to argue against someone. And I'm asking you to look at how he does it, not hatefully, not with a spirit of me against you where I'm going to beat you to the ground, but he honestly, deeply cares that other people change their minds and knows that racism in America won't stop unless the people he disagrees with have a change of heart, not just a change of the law. And to highlight that, I have a few little passages near the end I'm going to read and just speak to a little bit. So he says, very near the end of the essay, this I'm going to read and talk about a bit. Before closing, I feel impelled to mention one other point in your statement that has troubled me profoundly. This is MLK speaking. You warmly commended the Birmingham police for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, unviolent Negroes. And he goes on to speak about that. The people that MLK is disagreeing with have said that they commend the police, that they commend the order that the police have brought over real justice itself. Notice the differentiation he makes there. He says that the police keep order, and it's true that the police have kept order, right? There's been protest and the police have gotten rid of them. But he states in this essay that that order is at the expense of real justice. He's fighting on one level to get laws changed so that racism will be literally illegal. And in that end, his movement succeeds in this time period. But on another level, he's fighting for the spirits of the people, for their hearts and minds, that they would change and see the ways that they're racist. And that's really what's carried on to be a problem today, because that doesn't have as much to do with laws as it has to do with individuals saying, here's the ways that I've done racist things, how can I stop doing them? One of my favorite authors on the subject, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who you read the other week, argues that racism isn't a state of being necessarily. It's not you do racist things and claim I'm a racist, and then that's a racist, and then everyone else who does not claim to be a racist is exempt. There are racist things that we all do and constantly, whether that be jokes or the way we treat people or living in a state that isn't friendly to black people and doing nothing about it. And being complicit in those racist things doesn't mean that we're evil, according to Coates. He says, but you're still doing or complicit in the support of racist things. And when you see those in yourself, you can then begin to stop doing them and to stop supporting racism and to go out, and you'll be informed enough to actually do things that might change racism, that might fight it in yourself and therefore fight it in society. Society is a structure, and we're all little pieces of that structure. We all make it up. All of the contracts that we have to act certain ways, that is society. That's us coming together and being a society. So the way racism is being fought today is by introspection, funny enough. You have to look within yourself, see the power that you have if you are not a black person, if you have some type of privilege as a white person, name it and then stop doing it. There's a bunch of great books on the subject. I don't have time to go into it here. One's by someone named ENGL, and it's called White Fragility. It's a really good read. If you're interested in more of this stuff, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who you already read, has many essays on similar subjects, which I recommend you visit. He's very much on the hard side of things, but he has very interesting things to say. But I wanted to speak to these ideas, and I'm sure Thoreau will come to mind because MLK, Gandhi, you name the peaceful protest figure, they read and quoted Thoreau all the time. He was very influential to them in their view of what government should be and do. I wanted to talk about how MLK's ideas might relate to today. There's this line in another paragraph past the one I just read where Thoreau quotes T.S. Eliot, one of my favorite poets. He says, "As T.S. Eliot has said, the last temptation is the greatest treason to do the right deed for the wrong reason." MLK is speaking just like Thoreau did to the fact that injustice won't disappear until people are indifferent to it, and that will take forever. To actually get rid of injustice in a way that lasts because people actually believe in getting rid of it and they stand up for it, that requires you to do the right deed for the right reason. This quote from T.S. Eliot comes out of a play called Death Comes for the Archbishop, or Death in the Cathedral, I'm sorry, where T.S. Eliot explores like the myth of Christ's temptation, right? Why did Christ have to go be tempted for 40 days and then tempted again in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was pure enough to go be sacrificed on the cross? That's the main intrigue of the story of the play T.S. Eliot wrote. The main character in that play struggles knowing that he has a belief contrary to those in power, and he's a priest, and he has a belief contrary to the king, and this is based in a real story, the real thing that happened in history. And he's going in the play to face the king and defy him, and knowing that he'll be put to death for it. And the being put to death doesn't bother him. He dies at the end. What is his struggle throughout the whole play is, why am I going here to die? Am I going here to die because I'm serving the will of the people? Because I'm actually going to make a sacrifice? Or am I going out to die for myself? Is this self-righteousness? Is this ego? Self-righteousness and ego is going to result in anger and violence and more destruction. But a selfless serving of others, sacrificing of yourself, MLK going to prison even though he did nothing wrong, Gandhi going to prison for doing nothing wrong, Thoreau going to prison for doing nothing wrong. These are the people we hold up in history as the ones who changed things. They didn't just rage against the machine, but they had a message of change, and they executed it peacefully and were punished unjustly. They were blameless, like Jesus is that ultimate example that all of these guys that I just named quote. And that's what's at the core here, which is going to be the segue into how I'm thinking about things as they're happening now. There have been 2 protests here in town recently, and I've attended both just to see what they're like. I'm used to protests in Portland, and I've been thinking more deeply about them since I've moved here, and was surprised to see them here. But they were both very large. The first protest came off as very peaceful, and the police marched with everyone, and the police chiefs even came out and said that they would hold people responsible, and that's great. But it was also very vapid. The police and the speakers there didn't seem to understand what these protests in the wake of George Floyd's death are about. They don't seem to understand that the racism isn't simply choosing to be racist and then getting rid of the people who say I'm racist, that it's a much deeper issue. I went to the protest a few days later run by a young gal, and it was very angry, a lot of yelling, and the marching was a little bit more at odds with the police, and that felt a little weird too. And I asked myself in both occasions, what was the point of these protests? And one was to be angry and to rally up passion, but they didn't really have a direction, so I don't know what the point was. And the other, as far as I can see, the peaceful one, was a police coming together with the community saying that we're not racist. And while that's a nice sentiment, they missed the point of all of these protests, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is a sad thing. And I looked up what the NAACP, the Association for Colored People, that's been around since 1908 or something like that. The most famous people, MLK, Malcolm X, Du Bois, have all been members of. And the members here in town, the president, vice president, local pastors who are members, they didn't attend either of these protests. They're looking for a real different change, something effectual, something not just passionate. I'm not sure if the protests have a good place in the community, what they do. I'm sure they do some good, but they're so vapid at the end of the day, I think. The NCAA members instead scheduled meetings with the leaders here in town who make laws, city representatives, mayor, people in charge of actual change, people in charge of the budgeting of our town. They sat down with them and proposed what changes they would like to see to get rid of systemic racism. And that, I really hope, will have some changes, as it is having changes across the country. And that'll lead me to talk about one more thing. I don't want to go on forever here, but the big thing that's probably confusing to you all, that was confusing to me, that takes a lot of looking into, is why are so many of these protests demanding, as their big point of interest, that we defund, abolish police in cities, whole departments, and then rebuild them. You'll see that they want to abolish police, but the message isn't just to leave it abolished and to be an anarchy, right? What they're pushing for is to abolish the police the way they are because the protesters believe that the police are too corrupt, and they want to rebuild the police from the ground up with different goals, with different abilities, with less funding, with less members. And I'll try to break apart for you a little bit why they're asking for that. The last number of presidents have all increased the number of police in the country by 50 to 100,000 to 150,000 apiece. Just as a promise of part of their campaign that they're going to bring justice and order to the world. But the people of America as a whole never demanded more police. We seem to be doing fine with the number of police that we had. So we've been seeing an increase of police for just as part of presidential rhetoric. It doesn't seem to be necessary. And that's a lot of money. In the town in Minnesota where the police have been disbanded as of when I'm making this video, the police were getting a sixth of the entire city's budget for everything. That's ridiculously high. A sixth of all the money that that city has a year was the police. Just for them. They could spend it however they want. And the reason that that's a bit of a problem is that the police, and what they say they're supposed to do and what they should do, is protect and serve. Protect and serve the members of the community. You don't have to look far to see that black people in America have never felt protected and served by the police. They're scared when they get pulled over that they'll get shot. They're scared that when they have an illegal substance, marijuana or crack or something, that they'll get shot. You put this in perspective, if a white person gets caught with those drugs or with something just as harmful that's not illegal, like prescription drugs, which are serving probably the same purpose of helping people cope with a really hard life, not that that's a good option, but they're doing it, those white people aren't afraid that they're going to get shot by the police. They're not even particularly afraid that they're going to be in prison for very long. But black people are. And we have evidence year after year after year of police violence. The latest stat from this year is that 2.5 more cases of police violence have to do with black people than any other race in the country, even though the black people don't make up a great portion of the country. It's a very sad and terrible fact. The violence is there and we can see it. There's no reason to have your knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes, even 4 minutes after he's dead. There's no need for that. And the police there have been held accountable, but that accountability just isn't enough on the individual level anymore. The police officers who are standing by got fired as well, as they should. If you stand by and watch someone get murdered when you're in the position of power, I think that you deserve to be fired from your job. And all 4 people in this case, those 4 police officers, are all being persecuted or prosecuted for murder or manslaughter, as they should. If you're in the position of serving and protecting the population, And instead of serving and protecting, when someone uses a counterfeit bill, you kill them. You're not serving and protecting anymore. And the people, the other police officers standing around letting that man die, doing nothing, they're part of that problem as well. They're implicit in that murder, are they not? So these are the kind of things that we're facing, things that MLK was fighting for, where he got the laws to change, many of them. But his message only touched the minds and hearts of so many people. Often in public schools, his message gets used to soothe white people, actually, to make them convinced that the year that he accomplished all that he did, racism was defeated and no longer exists. When we just have too many statistics saying that racism does exist and that black people are still treated very terribly. Hopefully that article by Coates about how when a black person black people who get a lot of power, Michael Jackson or Kanye, can be tempted to try to literally become white and escape all of the problems that all of the other people of their skin color have and live with every day. But to get back for a little minute to the police departments, they have so much money, largely because they're militarized. The latest weapons, the latest military vehicles and videos. My friends of Portland, friends who were just marching, got shot with rubber bullets, got hit with tear gas from police officers in military gear shooting out of armored vehicles. What police force needs an armored vehicle? The only time we ever see them is when they're on the news shooting at protesters. It's just unnecessary. This is the kind of stuff that money's being spent on. More police than we probably need. And then military equipment like that. Well, not even that, but you don't have to look far to see that there are people whose whole profession is to go around speaking 200 plus precincts a year, teaching police officers how to react in certain situations as military personnel. So when when the person you're arresting makes a certain move and there's a chance they could be dangerous, you're trained to kill them. This is just common practice in the police departments. Part of their budget pays for it. And that just doesn't sound like protecting and serving. That sounds like killing. Why does the police need to be so violent? You've all thought through Thoreau's essay, and I've seen you respond that almost all of you have said that the government should be smaller, that we should take more responsibility for our communities. Thoreau makes the point that the police and that the military are the arms of the government. Without the police and the military, the government doesn't have power to impose things on us. They get imposed through the police and the military. So I find it ironic that I've met many people who want to have more freedom and less government in their life, but they want more police and more military and more spending towards that. It doesn't make sense, does it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But it doesn't make sense to me how you can want the smaller government while you're pumping money into making it stronger and bigger and more powerful. I've been going on for a while, I guess, but if we're going to defund the police, abolish them, and then rebuild them from the ground up and give them new goals, there's a lot of things that we can think about, reasons why that would be a good thing, how it could be good if it does happen, which it might happen across the country. The police currently, especially in places like Portland, most of their time is spent out on the streets, babysitting homeless people, the mentally challenged and disabled who are out in the streets and don't have family. They're called in to take care of people who are afraid but who maybe aren't under any real threats. This is most of their job. And those are things that if we want to change the police and take those responsibilities away from them, defund them and demilitarize them, then we have to take on those responsibilities. We have to make the structures and fund the structures to healthily house these people. About 80% of the people in Portland who are homeless, and it's a huge homeless population, are mentally disabled and their families have disowned them. They wander the streets there because it's not illegal to be homeless in Portland, so they travel there from all across the country. And the people of Portland feed the homeless very well. But we don't take care of them beyond that. They sleep in a tent on the street. We don't like to look at them. We give them some food. And then the police are constantly moving them, constantly asking them to leave places, constantly taking care of them, babysitting them, right? These are the kind of things that we can take responsibility for if police does change, if the hearts and minds do change. But more importantly with the police work is that there's a reason that so many black people get persecuted the way they do. I don't think that most police officers who end up hurting a black person or shooting one would say that they're racist. They probably very much believe that they're not. But they're in a militarized policing system with a history of singling out black people. If you want resources on that, I'd be more than willing to shoot some to you. There's just so many. There's so many. You can find them everywhere. Statistics that are real, stories that are real, the history that is real. The first police stations in the country, our country didn't have police for a while. The first police stations in our country were set up by slave owners so that they could have full-time employees who would take back slaves who escaped slavery. This is just in the DNA of our police system. It's very sad and unfortunate. My family's immigrants here from Russia to Canada to America. I'm a first-generation American. I love this country. I love being here. I love the people here. I love what it stands for. But we have to be very sad at the things, the abuses that are keeping people down, and fight them and change them and live in an even happier society and make all of the goals that was set up with this country become as more realized by the time we leave it. And it seems like one of those right now is that the police need to be changed. The only way to do that is through introspection, like I've been saying. Lots of great books, great speakers on the ways black people get mistreated every day that result at the end of the day in them being stuck in low-income housing, as they have been for a long time, being stuck and not being able to get certain jobs, being paid less, being afraid that they're going to get shot when they pulled over. I don't think most of the people who caused this to happen would say they're racist, but it's racist things that are happening that we're responsible for, especially as white people, if you're white watching this. So it sounds boring, but one of the most important things that can happen is just introspection. The police chief here in town had great ideas, had great things to say about holding his police officers accountable if they did anything racist. But he made a point to saying that he and the people in charge weren't racist, which he kind of missed the point of this whole movement, is that white people take a minute and be introspective and see the kind of racist things that happen because we don't do anything about them. The inaction is what's keeping racism there. So I think the biggest change we could have is that information. Have your local precinct do a couple months of a book club run by someone who can teach structural racism. We'd have to rebuild the police from the ground up with different priorities, different jobs. We don't need as many police as we have. We don't need them militarized. Think about the Thoreau essay and how you all responded to it. Yes, if we all followed our consciences, we wouldn't need government. Exactly. Maybe, and this is very hopeful, but maybe America's ready to grow in a direction where more of us are following our consciences, are loving, do need less regulation, do need less government, and less police and military enforcing that government on us. So I encourage you to think about those things as you read this essay. Like I said, next week's video will be about the expectations of the paper. This is the only time in the class I really came out and spoken my thoughts and is charged by just seeing everything on the news, participating in things, thinking. I encourage you to push back, disagree with me, add ideas. I really want to see what you have to say in the forum. Relate MLK's essay to what I just said. Relate your own thoughts to what I just said, your experiences. I'm open to being wrong about these things. And if you're open to expanding in other directions, just hit me up and I'll give you plenty of things to read and watch that you can process. And again, you don't have to agree with them, but very well thought out things that could change your mind, or at least make you see the things that you're thinking about in their broader overall context. So anyway, I hope I've spoken eloquently enough on the topic. I know I haven't nearly even scratched the surface on all the things that I'm thinking about, but I just want to hear your responses to all of that. I look forward to hearing those, look forward to working with you. It's been a pleasure so far working with you all in this class. It's been amazing to see so many thoughtful people come together in the journals and the forums. It's been a real joy. Sometimes you have classes where no one wants to participate in these things, and this one's been really fun. So, have fun studying this, think hard, think deeply, respond to me, push back. I think we're going to have a good time learning here. Recommend things for me to read and watch too, and for your peers. I look forward to seeing all of that, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.